I I have a class out of Washington, D.C. in training coaches. And at the moment, I'm Zooming in from Paris. And so the time difference is a little better for me. I don't know how it is for you all, but so excited to talk to you today. So one of the areas that I felt that I hadn't always done a good job as a coach instructor of doing was this idea of how we're actually an advisor and consultant in how do we design the engagement? How do we design the experience that our clients are going to have? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And I would invite all of you to chip in any questions or thoughts that you might have. I'm going to pause throughout to see if you have any questions. But let me show you now the slides and the structure of what we'll talk about today so I can point out where those opportunities will be. Good. So when we think of coaching engagements, we can think of it as a single client engagement, right? So many of us are life coaches, or we have a client who comes to us looking for a coach, and they just wanted me and you, just a single client. And then some of us coach individuals inside organizations. So maybe a leadership or an executive coach. Maybe there's a leadership training program that has coaching embedded in it. And we call that the client with organization sponsor. So I'll talk a little bit about designing that. Then if we have some time, I'll get into something that my book is about, which is designing organization-wide coaching programs. But I want to focus on the first two. And then if we don't have enough time for that, I can always send out some information if you're interested. But let's get started. So why is it important, this concept of how we design the coaching engagement? It is indeed all about trust with our client. It's the first step into co-creating our relationship together, because it requires that we ask them questions, find out who they are, what they're interested in, what they want to accomplish. And then they and us together with our knowledge of coaching will build out the experience. So in fact, you are the expert on the experience of coaching, and you're going to help them to use you the best possible. So what information do we want to start with this single client? Well, we want to know, what are the client goals and what are their perceptions of coaching? You know, many of us have a client that might come into coaching saying, well, I just want you to tell me how to do X, right? So we need to work with that perception, both up front, but throughout the coaching engagement to help them understand how to use us the best. And then what is driving them to coaching? What's the urgency? You know, sometimes I've had clients who said, well, my boss said I should have coaching. Not a high level of urgency there on their part, right? And so that's good information for me as I'm designing our engagement together. And then for many, they have outcomes that they really want. So I need to think about, well, are those realistic outcomes? For what period of time will we need to be coaching together to achieve those outcomes? What tools and resources do I need to draw upon? And if they have other people in the mix who have expectations of their outcomes, who are they? What are the expectations? And then, are they ready, right? What's their capability for even engaging in those outcomes they said they wanted? You know, sometimes people will come to me and say, I'm exhausted, but I know I need to do this. Well, that might change how we think about the design of the coaching, because maybe we work on energy, maybe we work on their health. We also want to collect sort of the work or home life information, because work is so much a part of our client's experience. Are there major changes occurring in their organization? Is there a leadership change in the offing? Have they started a new position? You know, these types of information would be important to us. And we have to ask these questions. Very often our clients may not think to share these, but this is the whole client we're dealing with. So we want to have a sense of, maybe I need to move into and understand, helping them with their understanding of their environment, their organization, their new position, and so forth. And then very often, even at the higher levels that I coach at, there's not a clear job description. People are confused about what are the key metrics for success for themselves. And so we need to, I just want to know that up front, because there's a whole set of work that we can do together to create a more successful outcome for them at work. And, perhaps they've had a recent review with their boss, and that would be good information. Or if they've taken assessments of some kind at work, but never had anyone to really dig in and explain what they mean and their relevance. Well, gosh, I want to know that too. So what are the design elements that we're talking about for a single client coaching engagement? Well, this is, my opinion. I'm going to put it out there, and then please bounce off of it and change it and make it your own. But what I call optimization coaching, where someone comes to me and says, I want to be just a better leader. I want to be better in my work. I need more energy. I lack motivation. They need to optimize who they are, where they are. What I'll often do is say, okay, let's work together 6 months, right? And then you have an option to continue. That way it keeps this sense of momentum over a discrete period of time. We set our goals around that. And then if they want longer, sure, why not? And a couple of tools that you might think about here are, for personal coaching, the Wheel of Life. If you're familiar with that, you can just Google it. It's like, what aspects of your life are less fulfilled than some other areas? And that helps set us up for some structure around what we want to tackle in that time period. And then we can return to that tool at the end of 6 months and say, what haven't we done? What more work is there to do? Or for my leadership 6 months engagements, I really like, if it's an energy issue, engagement issue, The Power of Full Engagement by Laura and Schwartz. Great book, very coach-like, how to think about their energy and how to assess, of the 6 components that, make up energy, what do they need to focus on? And again, 6 months will do X amount, but hey, we can come back to that and revisit whether you need to continue again. And then I have this thing called transition coaching. So I might have a leader. I had a leader come to me who was promoted to direct a division of an organization. They had not previously been in this kind of leadership capacity. And they were like, look, I know I need a coach. I am going to become the leader of the entire organization. I don't even know how to think about myself as a leader, and it starts today, right? So I'm thinking we need more time. And in part, I think we need more time because the first 3 months, if they've just started the position, is going to be frantic for them on some level. They're meeting new people, they're building relationships. The first 90 days, again, another great resource that I use with transitioning clients that talks about the intensity of those first few months. And then after the first 3 months, we can start to dig in and talk about leadership. And what does that look like in this new role? So that's a kind of, again, this is not a need or a necessity. It's just kind of how I think about the length of an engagement. But something that's really important to me is momentum. I don't like that feeling when our meetings are too far apart or erratic, because I feel like we lose motivation in the coaching. We lose a thread of a generative learning process that we're engaged in. And so really in my engagements, I'm generally coaching, have a session once every 2 weeks or so. And so that would be an opportunity to work on something and then go try something. And then they come back in 2 weeks after having tried it, and we talk about it, right? It's that generative learning piece. And then if it's a very intense, I need support through this project, I need support through this event that's happening, then it might be very fast paced week to week. And then finally, I do have some engagements where it might be monthly or much further out because we've perhaps coached together before. And what we're doing is having a check-in on some long-term kind of goals. Generally, that's further out than I would normally, but that might be with a client that I've worked with before. So let me, because I see a question in the query. Power of Full Engagement was the book that I mentioned that was energy sources, and a great coaching tool. I think that was all I mentioned for the moment. Two more design elements I'm going to talk about. I'll start with the resources and tools because I've mentioned a couple already. The Wheel of Life, again, you can just Google that for personal coaching. The idea of setting up life goals, like really long-term, or if there's issues of wellness, could we use a tool around that? So having those available to you, because it doesn't matter what client you have, you might have executive clients who could really use some of this. So I always have this, library of tools and resources that I use with each client. For my leadership clients, that includes assessments. I have certain assessments that I do. We recommend in our class to find an assessment that you really like, get good at it, get certified at it, and just use it again and again, because that makes you really adept at something. And it's a great way to support your leadership clients. I also do a lot with frameworks in the business space. So I'm going to mention a couple of books. Again, one is called Immunity to Change, where I have executives who are engaged in having a hard time getting their team to change. They're having a hard time to change. And it's a wonderful book. Robert Keegan, Leahy, talk about the competing agenda or the thing that's in the way of change. So I love that one. It has a good worksheet that you could use. And then difficult conversations, because I have some issues with, people always have a hard time with difficult conversations. So yes, I will put some of these into the chat a little bit later when I entertain questions, because I have a hard time double tasking. So in just a minute, I will do that. Let's talk about the contracting. Contracts are really important. You want to know that you and your client know what you've agreed to, how many hours or days or however you want to think about the length of time. What are the limits to confidentiality? So what would you share or what would you not share? And what is our definition of coaching? And yes, the client owns the results. I like to have that in my contract, because some people, they hear what you say, what coaching is, but they may not get it, right? So an important reference for me and ICF coaches is the ICF ethics code. And there are two standards in there that say you explain and ensure that prior to or at the initial meeting that our clients understand the limits and understand the potential value of coaching, nature and limits of confidentiality, et cetera, and to create an agreement contract regarding roles and responsibilities and rights. So that is the beginning of our presentation. That's the single client. And I'm going to write down those books that are just great resources. But I want to take your questions while we do that. So if you could speak your questions, that would be great. Ash, maybe if you can see questions that I have missed, that would be great.
Sure.
As well.
I have question, Bobby here. Sorry. Yeah, Aishwarya, can I go ahead, or you are someone?
Yes, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
See, I like the way you structured it, Sandy, and the way you said how we should go about doing it. But more often than not, neither the sponsor nor the coach is clear about some of these things. Then what happens? Because the organization could be trying coaching for the first time and they wanted to start with someone, or and at least in Indian context, most of the coaching is seen as something is wrong with this guy, and that is the perception the coachee has, may not be necessarily true from the organization perspective. So the coachee is also confused. So this questions which you asked us, some of them need to be asked to the organization before we get into the engagement. But if it's straight one-on-one, so how do we go about doing it? And what has been your experience on this?
So I'm hearing what you're asking is about what if they're inside an organization and so they have a sponsor? How do we handle that piece? Is that correct?
Yeah, and also when the coachee is not clear and the organization is not clear about a lot of things, the questions which you are saying.
Because they're really, yes, they're really new, right, to this whole concept.
Yeah.
So for me, and you know, I started coaching in 1999. So really coaching was unknown at that point. So it was a process of education. Now, if they're awarding the coaching, like, yes, we're going to jump in, you know, we do have this contract. It's first saying, here's what a coach is, and this is what we can do together. I'm going to support you in learning. So all we have to do in the beginning is figure out what you want to learn, right? What do you want better in your life or in your work? And gee, if you have a leader and they're giving you this coaching, but they don't know quite what that's all about, let's ask them too. How would they like you to show up differently at work? Or what would they like you to be better at? I mean, basically, we're setting up the idea that we help people learn. And so I don't know if that answered your question to start with.
I think it's sort of, yes, but I mean, what I'm getting is I understand it will change from situation to situation and individual to individual. But I think it's a good way to start with the way you're saying it, and then take it from there. Depending upon the responses, we can get perhaps probe more or just ask questions to get more clarity. Either way, thanks.
Yeah, it is like we're learning together, we're co-creating together.
Yeah, correct. That's what I'm saying. Co-creating and co-learning. I'm just saying that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just as an add-on to this is Tram here. Just as an add-on to Bobby's question, one of the things that you have discussed is assessments, which is a very interesting conversation we keep hearing with our corporate customers. The coaching is one-on-one, but the sponsorship is by the corporate. And there is a tendency among the sponsors to do a pre-assessment. And once the contract is completed, they want to do a post-assessment and then do a comparison to see if there is some ROI. Transformation ROI may not necessarily be monetary ROI. Maybe that will come along the way. Still, nobody knows how that is going to be measured. But there is a tendency among corporates to try and do a pre and post in a way to measure the ROI of transformation.
So return on investment. It's a hard conversation for us coaches, right? Because what do we attribute the lack of progress or the progress to? It might be our coaching, but we also might be engaged early in the coaching with a situation where somebody has no energy, no motivation. We need to focus on that. And so we're not necessarily going to get the ROI that they're looking for. I'm going to talk next about setting up with a sponsor so that we have more of a return on expectation. Okay, ROE. Because if we have expectations clear and adequately articulated by the organization, and we're in the room as coaches sort of saying, well, we can't promise that our client is going to deliver X, but we can say that. Now we're, again, co-creating ROE. But ROI and coaching is a long conversation, which we could have a whole nother class on. But I understand the challenge, yes.
Sandy, this is Sunita.
Thanks.
I have a question. How do you, I mean, the details which you are sharing is very good, but how do you check readiness for coaching in the individual?
Yeah.
He's giving you all the positive data which you're asking, but how do I check? Because
Yeah.
somewhere second session or third session is when the disagreement starts creeping. You know,
Yeah.
how do I assess that early?
Yeah. So their readiness, they may not be comfortable telling you that they're not ready or something's going on that's really hard. And so I think of it once again as co-creating. I had a client who all eager to start in this leadership development program, full of energy, ready to go. And, second or third session, he said, oh gosh, I just came out of the hospital. It's undiagnosable. My wife served me divorce papers and is now suing me for custody. But otherwise, that I'm fine, right? And so I'm like, okay, what energy does my client have to engage in leadership coaching? Will we be able to focus on the kinds of return on expectation of this program? Well, that's why I work a lot with energy with my clients and health. It doesn't matter if we're in a leadership development program. If what is in the way of the coaching and the leadership is needs coaching, we go there because we can do that. And if you feel like they're dragging their feet, that's our coaches, we're partners. We say, hey, I'm noticing you're not picking up on some of the work that we've talked about. And I don't know, am I picking up that you're not fully, is this not the right time for you? What's going on, right? So we're always contracting as we go along. And we hope we have the trust that they will tell us, because there's nothing worse than coaching somebody who's dragging their feet and not interested, not engaged. Tough.
And
Thank you.
Sandy, in that example you gave, if the coachee wants to change the goalpost, because now I have this issue, and obviously my mind is not on the leadership coaching, but I have still a coaching issue. Will
Yeah.
you change that? I mean, this is post-contracting.
Yep. So I think of contracting as continuous.
Okay.
Whatever's in the way of that goal, or if that goal has to change, we need to recontract. In essence, doesn't have to be written down, but we need to kind of go where the support is needed to make a difference for the client. Now, I know there's other situations where you have an organization and they're pretty clear on what they want. So we'll talk a little bit about that next.
Thanks. Great.
So let me jump into that. And yes, we'll have another opportunity to talk about questions. So now we're talking about the client who has been brought to the coaching through an organization. It might be the leader of the client. It might be an HR professional. They might be embedded in a leadership program. And it is our job as coaches to create trust and clarity now with two entities, the client and the sponsor. So we need more information. So we need all the same information we have with our single client, which about, their expectations of coaching and their understanding of coaching, et cetera. But now we have to do the same with the sponsor. So we need to make sure our sponsor understands what coaching is not, that it isn't we're not going to play the role of the leader, for example. The leader says to me, I need you to get them to do X. I'm like, well, maybe the leader needs coaching, right? If they don't know how to help lead and manage their client. Interesting. So I will explain how that's going to work with goal setting, and I'll talk later about alignment meetings and so forth. And again, confidentiality limits. Do they own the results of the assessments? For example, is there any information shared between coach and sponsor at all? And clearly we need to get, well, what are their goals? And if they don't know for sure what the goals are, it's an opportunity to help. So we're now coaching the sponsor in essence. Now I've had sponsors come to me and say, look, this person is being too rough on their people. Their team is coming to me and telling me they're not nice to their teammates. So I need you to help the client with that. And I say, well, have you told your direct report, my client, have you told them about this issue? And if they say no, it's their job to tell them first, right? It's not the role of the coach to be the leader. They have to be the leader or the HR person to communicate the information. And I also ask, well, gosh, I hear you have some serious concerns. What are the what's the risk if they don't improve on this? And if they say to me again, if they say their job is on the line, we're going to give them 6 months with you. And if they don't improve, they're out. Personally, I don't really care to take those assignments because it's putting so much pressure on a confidential relationship with my client. And especially if it's not communicated, it certainly needs to be communicated to the client. It's not the job of the coach to communicate that their job is on the line, right? So we need to make sure the sponsor expectations and that they're communicated to the client. So there are actually some ways we can be sure this happens, right? That we're all aligned, sponsor, client, and coach. And they're contracting, a pre-launch meeting, our interviews, leadership development plan, and alignment meetings. So let's get into each of those. So you remember the ICF Code of Ethics about contracting. Well, notice it says client and sponsors must understand the nature and potential value of coaching, limits of confidentiality. So now we want to put everybody on the same page in the contracting. That's important. And we want to talk about confidentiality. We want to talk about conflicts of interest. Now, this is an interesting one. Some of you may coach many different people in one organization. You might coach teams. You might do assessments for many people in an organization. So it's important that you articulate in your contracting what might occur in terms of conflicts of interest. We see this with internal coaches. They have to be really careful that an internal coach might be in HR and they might coach somebody. And then what do you know, the next year they're actually assessing their performance and whether or not they should be promoted. If that's the case, then I would want to be sure that they articulated to the client upfront in the contracting phase, this might occur. So you managed, client can manage what's shared, what's not shared, right? And so we want to understand too, what does the client own? What does the sponsor own? Again, just as we did with who owns the results here. So a pre-launch meeting is before the coaching starts. So that's the one time I would meet with a sponsor without the client in the room. And because they want to have a conversation with me about their expectations or something like that. Well, then I will talk to them and I'll make sure that they've communicated their expectations to the client. But even better to have coach meet with both the client and sponsor. And then we can be in the same room at the same time, understanding the same words. So now the client understands the sponsor's understanding, and I understand both of their understanding of coaching and what it does and what our results are going to be and so forth. And then here's something else that I design in many of my leadership sponsor and client engagements, 6 to 8 interviews around a client with their leader, their peers, their direct reports. And that's like a 15 to 30-minute interview where I'll say it's anonymous. I won't report individual comments back on the client, but just perceptions and themes, right? Just themes. So if 2 or more people mention something, it'll kind of go into my theme box. I never do these without developing rapport with the client first, and make sure that this is something that they want to do. And their involvement is so important because they're going to send the invitations and say, look, I really appreciate your clear feedback on me. It's really going to be helpful. And usually those results are only for the client. So in terms of order of questions, I'll say, yeah, just describe this person as a leader. So we're broad and we use these great language. It's really a great question. Get a lot of information about your client. What are their strengths? What are their areas of development? So those are interviews that I will often include in my contracting. So I won't contract by the hour, I'll contract by the package. 1 assessment, 6 interviews, 6 months of coaching. Many of you may be familiar with the leadership development plan. So that's something that helps tie the client to their objectives. It makes it clear, what did I decide up front? And it builds their expectations of what's going to happen in this coaching. Where are we going to go? And it might be shared, or some part of it might be shared with their sponsor, but it's up to them. Usually this is a confidential document to help us define what we're going to talk about. And in this example, the way I've set it up is to emphasize what would be the impact on the organization if you were to achieve your goal. And these are client goals, and these might be goals that were expressed by the leader, for example. And so you can see, here the client goal is managing up better. And they think that the benefit to that was they'll be able to sell themselves and their team better. And what's the challenge? What's in the way of that for them? Well, I hate the feeling of selling myself. Okay. Well, so that's a deeper level, right? But the organizational impact will be that I have more visibility, and the other departments and leadership will know more about what we do and maybe have more collaboration. So now that's almost, the organizational impact almost becomes motivating to overcome the challenge. So that's another benefit of this, is it helps the client see, well, if I did move into this space, wow, this could be powerful. And then if they have a goal that has been told to them by the organization or leader, like build selling skills. Yeah, you got to build your selling skills. Well, bring in $1 million in new products. The challenge may be, well, I took the sales training, but I have no idea how to apply it. All right, well, there's a gap here. And that's what we help with. Like, how can we help them put together a plan on how to become competent here? So that's the leadership plan, development plan that I will often have with as an element of my engagement. Something that I talk about and made as part of the title of our engagement today was alignment meetings. And much like the pre-launch meeting, it's a 3-way meeting, client, coach, and sponsor. And so this is where I will have started coaching with the client, and we've developed a rapport. They've gotten some goals that they want to achieve. And what we're going to do is, it's going to be the client's job to talk to the sponsor, the leader, about what it is they're going to work on. And the reason it's the client's job is because they're going to present it to the leader or sponsor and then ask for their feedback. Was there something else that you thought would be good for me to work on? And now we're getting alignment and return on expectation, right? We're understanding that the way you think about that goal might be different than your sponsor. So now we have to align the fact that your sponsor wants X, you want Y. We thought it was the same thing, but it wasn't, because we've now gotten better languaging and understanding with the client and sponsor. And often it's defining the sponsor's hard metrics for success. They're usually already there. We want $1 million new sales this year. But what about the soft ones? Maybe they've never discussed with their client that they're unhappy with their behavior with their team. And so that might be an opportunity because the coach is in the room to help with those soft ones, to articulate that. And we're helping coach the supervisor, the sponsor, to help develop this employee through this process. And it's almost like creating the mindset of professional development here, or a future feedback partner. Whereas before it may have just been once a year, now we have this kind of continuous feedback loop that we hope to increase possibly. And we're also helping our clients speak for themselves and say, this is what I'm working on. This is what I did well. And of course, for the coach, we gain insight into the client environment. So I'll do these meetings certainly after I've developed rapport with the client, but I might do one in the middle and I might want to do one at the end of our engagement. For those clients who there's some urgency on the behalf of the sponsor for them to improve in something, I might do 3. Yeah. So essentially, there's a free tool on my website under learning resources, sandralstewart.com. So you can see something in more detail here. But in preparation for the alignment meeting, it's getting the client, to determine what they want to share with the sponsor in terms of their goals. And then ask them, what questions would you like me to enter into the room with? Because sometimes that's different than what they feel comfortable asking their sponsor. And remember that this is a two-way conversation. This isn't you reporting in. And then it's your job to facilitate that process. It's almost like coaching 2 people at once. You create the space. And you make sure that the sponsor is clearly articulating what they expect from the client. If you say the client needs to be more engaged, well, what are the behaviors that you associate with engaged? Because being more engaged, we can't coach to that, right? And then close the meeting with future expectations. And then meet with your client. Often I'll do this right away, because my client may not have heard everything. It's maybe they're stressed in the meeting, or they just hear different things than I hear. So I synthesize with them what I heard, what they heard, and formulate some next steps. So I'll stop again. And we've now kind of covered the slides on where we have a client inside an organization with an organization sponsor. So what thoughts or questions might you have about that? Anything?
Please go ahead and unmute yourselves and you can ask questions. If not, you can type it out on the chat box. I'll read it out for Sandy.
Yeah, so this might answer some of our questions before about how do you get the client motivated? What do you do when the sponsor doesn't even understand what coaching is and the client doesn't understand what coaching is? Well, that pre-launch meeting, the alignment meeting, that helps tie everybody into what's happening here. What should we expect? And so using those kinds of elements in your design can be very helpful. Okay, if there's no questions, then I'll just finish out this kind of.
Sandy, I have a question.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, at times in the alignment meeting, the client has identified certain behavior changes he wants. And when he has presented it to the sponsor, his reporting manager, the reporting manager at times comes up with, okay, you should get a better understanding of the business as a requirement, or more of a technical skill that needs to be developed. Those are kind of things that come up, which has not come through the interviews, or it has come through the interview, but it's not behavioral or that kind of change that we want to see. It's a technical skill learning.
That's right.
How do we manage that difference actually? How do we get the leaders' views in such a thing?
Well, so I would ask the sponsor, so tell me more about what technical skills you're referring to. Tell me the impact on their performance that you're looking for as a result of that. And hey, sponsor, leader, what do you think is the best way for the client to learn those technical skills? Right. And I already might have a sense of, well, could we, what do you think about them getting a mentor? Or what do you think about them pairing with somebody who's very good at that skill? Oh, and then the leader thinks, gee, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, we could do that. Right. So now again, we're starting to co-design some next steps that the client can choose to take or not take. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. So you're saying it can possibly get out of the coaching assignment and get into a mentoring. We can help in terms of positioning, either choose or have a mentor or take it in. But yeah, that's a good insight, actually. Have a conversation around it.
And nothing wrong with having a mentor and a coach.
Yeah, perfectly okay. But
Yeah.
to be honest, it was more that, yes, it is a coaching assignment. Yeah, I think that's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabisaj. We have two questions.
Sandy, another question.
Sorry, Sunita, 1 second. We just have 2 questions in the chat box, then we'll just.
Sure.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, so Ruxana is asking, how do you build trust and encourage potential clients to participate in a peer coaching environment within an organization?
Trust in peer coaching. So I would probably define peer coaching first, which is either a group or 2 people coaching each other in an organization. They are not necessarily related in their work. They might be related, they might not be. How do we handle trust between 2 people in a work environment, peer coaching? So everybody has to be in choice. And so if my peer coach starts to get into some questions in areas I am not comfortable with as their peer, it's my right to say, and we must understand always, it's my right to say, you know what, I'm not going to go down that path, you know. So as long as I'm in choice as a client, I can trust that I will share what I want to share. So that's one thing, making sure people are in choice around being coached. Another part of the ICF coach talks about managing and being aware of potential power differential. And power differential can be because someone's really, you know, very proficient at a skill. It could be because they're a higher level in the organization. So we need to be aware that if we're peer coaching somebody and we know we have a certain power over them in some fashion, that we create a space that says, I know I'm a higher level and more proficient than you are, but in this moment together where we're peer coaching, I want us to be partners, and I want, you tell me, like, if that's going to be possible. They might say, well, I don't really know, like, you're so smart. Oh my gosh, and okay, well, you can tell me if it's going to interfere with the coaching. So we're co-designing. Yeah.
Thank you, Sandy. I hope, Ruxana, your question was answered. Next is Dr. Sukhnit. Should we also take an update for the sponsors as per their expectations? Maybe I missed that part.
Oh, an update, meaning like throughout the coaching engagement, maybe? Yeah. So we can at any point, say, like, if it's a little interesting, but if a sponsor reaches out to me without telling the client, hey, I want to know what's going on in the coaching. I will never tell them what's going on in the coaching, but I will say, sorry, we have a confidential relationship here, and I'll explain again why. However, please reach out to the client and ask them, let's have a 3-way conversation again. And that can happen at any time. And we can start our coaching up front with that expectation. Because maybe the leader is really not trusting the coaching. You know, they're like, I don't know what's going on with you guys. It's all confidential. So, okay, how about if we co-design that at any point you can raise your hand and say, hey, can we have a three-way? Remember, it's not me saying anything for the client. It's the client saying what they want to say in that meeting. And so now I'm helping the sponsor and client potentially bridge a gap of communication.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Sandy. Sunita, please go ahead and ask your question.
No, that it was the question which she just answered. So
Okay, great.
great.
So
Okay.
I'll just read out the next question, or do you want to?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So can we share our coaching session results to sponsors and update him or her?
So the only thing I report, so I will tell you what I do, right? The only thing I report back to a sponsor is if the client is engaged, meaning are they coming to meetings? And where are we in the engagement? Are we month 3? Are we in month 4? How's it going? It isn't full confidentiality if I say, oh, you know, they're working really hard on that difficult conversation thing. Like, I don't get into content. And if they want content, if they want to know, like, well, tell me more how it's going with their team, I'll say, hey, again, raise your hand to the client and ask the client, is there some difficulty with you asking the client how it's going? And we can have a three-way meeting if it's more comfortable. But very little shared with the sponsor because I will breach the trust of the client. Then they'll be like, well, what should I tell you if you're going to tell my sponsor, my leader, what's going on in our sessions? It's a very interesting dynamic.
Great. Thank you so much, Ed. I think that's all the question that I found on chat box. If anybody else wants to unmute themselves and ask questions, please go ahead.
Hello, Sandy. I do have a, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So this is Roxana. You just answered my question a few minutes earlier. I have a follow-up question. So if I were designing a peer coaching program within my organization, I see the need for the coaching. I see the value that it can bring to my peers. How would I encourage potential clients, my peers, to sign up for this program if they have not been, either they have or not been exposed to coaching before? I mean, there would be questions around how confidential is this going to be? Is feedback going to go back to my boss? Am I going to lose my job? You know, those kind of things. How do I navigate that?
Yeah, peer coaching is dicey that way. It's difficult that way. And if I tend to say that it's probably not peer coaching if they have no training and coaching skills, you know, because it might be advice giving, it might be, I don't know, you know, but I would suggest a peer coaching, peer coaching training so that they understand the limits of confidentiality. If there's going to be limits. There's not, everything can't be confidential when you leave the room. I in a peer coaching, it's very hard to monitor that, especially with moderately trained people. So we need to contract around that. So let's have a peer coach training session so we understand what open-ended questions are. We understand what partnering and thinking is versus advising and consulting. How about we think about how we want to contract this? Because it's okay to peer coach if there's little confidentiality. You just have to have it clear that there's little confidentiality before engaging in that process. The two peer coaching pairs or groups, they could write their own contract. Maybe you create a template contract and you say, what's not going to be confidential? How will we handle this? How will we handle that? And you're creating norms for you're helping them create norms for their relationships. I love these peer questions. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a few more slides. It's big picture stuff because this is, how do I design a program, a coaching program? So I'm not going to spend a lot of time because we have just a few more minutes, but I'll just go real quick just to give you flavor. This is covered more extensively in my book. But, we have the same idea here. We have design elements, so we need the goals and strategy for a coaching program design. And what business problem are we solving? What outcomes do we want? And what's the human challenge, right? So if I want to facilitate a company merger, that's my business outcome. I want it to go faster and be more effective. Well, what are the human challenges? Well, we have two overlapping teams that they're going to be really angry at each other. They're going to be very insecure. And we want them to, we're going to have attrition of our people because they're going to be insecure. They're going to be competitive. And we want to cut down on competitiveness. So we need to have something that brings people together. Okay, that's a great goal. And then we're going to plan around that. So what are we going to do? Are we going to use training? Are we going to use mentoring, succession planning programs tied into individual coaching, peer coaching, team coaching? We can have all kinds of crossover between all these modalities, and we put that together and launch something. So here's an example of a company in the UK that did this. They were a technology company, software company, and their goal was, we're growing at a huge pace, and we have a lot of people who are in silos of expertise, and we need them to learn other stuff so that we can get them deployed around the company differently. And we have so many new hires coming in, and we need them up and running much faster. And our goal is to grow faster. So what did they do? They started with one-on-one executive coaching with external coaches because they felt coaching and coaching skills were all about creating the growth mindset. We're all about this idea of how to help empower other people and have better communication, self-awareness, all those things. So they started with the executives. Then they trained 400 of their employees to be coaches, and they could coach up to 2 hours a week. And they built a software tool to match coaches and clients so that, you wouldn't have as much power differential between coach and client. And they found that they were able to coach 150 people at a time, and 60 of those were new hires. And then when they embedded coaching in the training program, it sped up people's adoption of training, of the concepts. And so what were the results? Did they grow faster? They did. And they attribute that to people with open mindsets. The coaching taught them the open mindset to lead with questions and inquiry rather than just to solve, and create greater self-awareness to empower others and themselves, and integrated learning, as I mentioned. And the bonus was they won an award in the UK as the best place to work, because they were now coaching everybody in the organization that would want to coach. And the young new hires thought this was the best competitive advantage as far as they were concerned in the marketplace. So it had a high impact on attraction of new talent, and also kept people there longer. So this was an effective coaching program design. So that is our presentation for today. I see, looking at the clock. Any questions on that final piece?
Sandy, is this the example which you gave, an example for system coaching?
And so I think when you say system coaching, you mean something systemic throughout the organization?
Yes, and different levels, because I saw it as a collaboration, as a behavior and a culture issue in this example.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's system thinking. It's really thinking about the whole, and coaching the whole, creating culture change.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I hope it's been helpful to you. I hope you have some resources that might be helpful or some thinking. I'm happy if Ash would like to send on the presentation, that's fine.
Sure. So, everybody please be rest assured the recording will be uploaded on YouTube, so you guys can view it how many times you guys wish to. Thank you so much, Sandy. And thank you for all the audience who have attended today and for such an interactive session. I'm just posting a few updates about CTT webinars, upcoming webinars. So you can go ahead and register. Please make sure that you guys have also applied for your CCEU certificate. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you.